Okay, so this is the Living Environment Unit 5 review of immunity. Main objectives of this unit, we talked about why we get sick and what pathogens are. We talked about the role of the body's immune response, so specifically white blood cells and antibodies. And then we also talked about how modern medicine supports our immunity. So we talked about vaccines and antibiotics, and then what happens when our immune system malfunctions. So let's start with pathogens. Basically, there's different kinds of pathogens. They're small microorganisms that cause disease, so they make us sick. Bacteria is very small, reproduces really quickly, but it can be killed by antibiotics. And this is a good thing because if you have a bacterial infection, you can get rid of it relatively easily. Virus is a little bit more difficult. We can't kill it with antibiotics. It's very small, but it's actually non-living. So the way it works is it takes over a host and it just invades those cells and then uses the cell to kind of reproduce on its own very quickly. Fungus is next. Things like yeast and mold are types of fungus, and these grow quickly in warm or moist environments. Lastly, what you should know about pathogens is that they have antigens on the surface. And antigens are just these proteins with a specific shape that sits on their cell membrane. And each different microorganism has a different antigen on it. And this is what makes the body remember it or not. And then in a second, we'll talk about antibodies and how those shapes match up to actually cause that memory to happen later on when the pathogens enter the body again. The immune response. So first, the first defense against pathogens is really the skin. It protects us. It's like we're in this little cocoon. Secondly, mucus. So the mucus that's in our nose protects our body from actually having pathogens enter when we breathe in. The same thing in our throat. Number 3, if a pathogen gets into the body, though, our immune system responds. And this is called the immune response. So the first thing that we should mention is antibodies. Antibodies basically mark or flag the pathogens with a specific shaped protein to show immune system that they're bad. So if I go back to this picture that we saw before, you can see that the antigens have a specific shape, and those match the antibody on kind of the arms of the antibody. So they know exactly which antigens have entered the body and can start to prevent your body from getting sick. White blood cells will then engulf or eat the pathogens that have been marked for destruction by the antibody. And lastly, memory cells are what remember the previous pathogens that have entered the body with any remaining antibodies left after the attack. Vaccines. So vaccines are just a dead or weakened pathogen. They allow the immune response to begin in the body, and they also help build immunity so the body remembers whatever the pathogen is later on. One thing we should keep in mind when you get a vaccine, so let's say you get this year's flu vaccine, it will only protect you against this year's flu. It won't protect you from next year's flu because next year's flu is going to be slightly different and the antigens will be different in it. So vaccines are specific and they will only work for a certain kind of virus or maybe a few viruses, but won't work for everything. Malfunctions. There's 2 malfunctions that we should be aware of. The first is AIDS. This is caused by the HIV virus during unprotected sex, needle transfer, or a blood transfusion. HIV enters white blood cells and causes the immune response basically to attack its own cells. Most people that die from AIDS don't die because they have AIDS. They die actually because their immune system is so weak that even if they catch a cold or something really simple, their body is not able to fight it and breaks down. The second malfunction of the immune system is allergies, and this is when a person's body responds to something harmless with the immune response. So it kind of goes full out as if there's a pathogen that's invaded the body when it's just something like pollen, pet dander, or even a type of food. Don't forget to write your 2 questions to check for your understanding of this video and their answers.